Here we are in the same scene, and we will now actually attach a polygon mesh to this joint chain, so we can actually get some deformations. A good practice is to test things once more before you attach the mesh to rig. So I will test my reset button, it seems to be working. I also want to keep the goal, so I will go under the IK tag, and under advanced I will check this keep goal guy. Let me do a reset now. I will also try a reset here on the root, so seems to be all in order, so we can proceed. You see, I created this basic cylinder that will represent a leg, and I will use it to show you which topology and how to place your edge loops to get really proper deformations. I was mentioning this also in volume 1, so I strongly suggest getting it and watching it, and you will be able to follow more precisely. So now let's attach that skeleton to this leg we have, and to do that you have to select all the joints that you want to attach and the polygon mesh itself. So middle click your mouse while you have this parent selected, and it will select all children beneath, and also select this leg mesh and go here under character, commands, bind. And some of you that have experience with rigging will see that I will run into problems, and I want to run deliberately into problems so we can solve them, because you will most probably run into problems while you're rigging. And the first problem is the next one. Let me select my goal and try to move it, and you will see what happens. This really doesn't work as we expected. Maybe it works like this, but it behaves really odd, and the reason is we don't have enough definition in our geometry here, so the actual deformation can occur. Also probably notice that we got two new guys here. We got a brand new skin deformer under this leg and a weight tag. So let me delete them both for now, and I will explain it in the next step. So delete it, so we have a nice clean start. So let's select our leg and go into the edge mode, and should probably select a loop of these edges and hit connect command, and it will split them right in the middle, exactly what we need. Let's select again our complete joint chain, just middle click on the parent and it will select them all down the chain, and control click to select this, and go character, commands, bind. Let's try it out again. So select your joint goal and see what happens, and you can actually see we have somewhat better results, but this is not really good as we expected. Clearly you can see we don't have enough information here. Regardless of this added loop, it simply isn't enough. Let me undo all that to the state we haven't bind those two together. And I want to create additional cuts, and I will select my leg, go into the edge mode, and here on the side I want to add somewhat different loops than you are maybe used to when you are modeling. These loops have to be tilted a bit, and by tilted I mean you should actually pay attention where your mesh will compress, so you have to leave enough space there. So if you put a knife cut like this, then here, let me just doodle it for you. Here you won't have enough space to actually deform that nicely, and here you will have extra space, which you actually don't need. Let me undo all that, and I will show you what kind of loops you need for proper deformations. So where the joint will compress, you have to have wider space, and where it stretches, you have to have tighter space. And you can simply do something like this. If you press the shift key, you will get this constraint value. Actually, I think I will use a smaller value, something like half. So you can divide the values here in Synapse4D. It works throughout the application. So divided by 2, you will get 22.5. So try something like this. And on the bottom side also. So now we have enough space here for compression, and we have really tight loops here that will stretch somewhere around here. So now hopefully it carried all the way to the other side. Yes, it did. And we can now bind it once again. So select all the joints, the mesh itself, and go character bind. Now let us see what happens now. This is much better. It isn't perfect, but it is really good for now. Now let me explain those two guys that are created once you activate the bind command. First one is the weight tag, and we will talk about this a bit later. The first thing I want to talk about is this skin deformer. This skin deformer is a special type of deformer inside Synapse4D, which is designed for character animation. And the first most usable thing that I will present to you is this type of deformation. You just zoom in a bit so you can actually see what happens. If I change this to a spherical, you will see a change in deformation. And the third mode is banded, where you can actually decide will it be linear or completely spherical or anything in between. The good thing about blended mode is that you can actually paint your own vertex map and put it here, where 0 value on painted map will mean linear, and 100% painted vertex map will mean spherical. Let's leave it just at a spherical mode for right now, since it tends to keep the volume of the polygon mesh in the spherical mode. It's much better than linear. So let's try some poses for our guy, and let's try some really extreme pose, something like this. And here we have a problem. We have mesh intersecting, and that is what we don't want to do. So no matter how Synapse4D does the job on automatic deformations, we have to manually paint the deformations we want. And that is exactly what we will do with this weighting guide. This is the weight tag, and it stores the joints that are assigned to a polygon mesh. And we will use the weight tag and the weight manager to tell exactly which point is deformed and by which amount with any of these joints. So we will maybe want this point to be influenced less by this one or more by this one. This is where weight painting comes in. It is a way of manually painting and saying Synapse4D, how do you want it to deform your mesh? One little thing that I will also do before delving into weight painting, I will create what many animators do, and especially when you are doing weight painting, you want to create some sort of a poses. So you can easily switch from the default pose to some other pose you have in mind. The general idea is to use negative frames. You might ask, why negative frames? Well, simply you might possibly have already some animation in the scene, and just not to interfere with that animation you might have. So let me do some negative values here, so -10 let's say, and I will increase this so I have access to those negative values. And let me create a keyframe now for this default position. So let's control click here and will create a keyframe, and I will go to frame -10 and create some sort of a really extreme pose, something like this, where actually I have collisions in the mesh which I want to avoid, and I will create a keyframe once again. So now I have a relatively simple way of going in between those two poses and checking on every of these steps how my weight painting will look, how those deformations will occur. So let's set it to frame 0 and let's start with the weight painting. And I advise you to take a deep breath because weight painting can be a little bit difficult at a first glance. It is more time consuming than anything else. It is a somewhat tedious process sometimes, and I hope I can explain it really good enough for you to understand and to be able to paint your deformations with ease. I really thought long about this part of this lesson and how will I present it in the most useful way to you. I want to cover weight painting in detail, but I also want to avoid being too technical. So I had to find some sort of a balance really to show you many things, since there is so many things in weight painting. It's so full of features and it can be a little bit intimidating, but we can deal with it. Also, there is a serious lack of information on weight painting and character rigging in general for Cinema 4D. So I'll try my best to cover in detail, but to avoid cramming you down with too many information. So I just want to push you in the right direction, but really explain for you to understand the weight painting process. So you can see I deliberately deleted the skin deformer and the weight tag, so you can have a nice clean start with clean values. And let's do a bind. So now we actually have the same thing. This is the default thingy. Also under skin deformer, I will just set this type to spherical. And that's about it. You can also see that I removed the reset position button just temporarily for the scene, because here we have keyframes set, so we will just work in this range from these keys. You see, I already want to change a little tiny thing, so I will select my IK tag, and here under advanced I will say align goal. So watch this guy now, this joint goal. It will orient the same way as this last joint in chain. This is my personal preference. You can leave it any way you prefer. So let's go back to frame 0 and well, with weight painting, see here under this weight tag we have some basic features, and if you double click this weight tag you'll get the weight tool. You can actually select the weight tool from here. You can see it in the character menu, but this is some sort of a shortcut for selecting that tool. So here we will find some settings regarding our weight tool, and let's see what actually happens if we select a few of these joints. And you will see that that weighting, that amount of deformation that will occur on each of these points is controlled gradually by each of these joints. Let's put that in some sort of an extreme pose by going towards frame -10. And you can actually see we have a deformation here that is not really good, that is intersecting, and we will fix that right now. I'll double click here and I will lock this guy, so we have access to this tool always. We'll run briefly through all these settings on this weight tool tab. And to paint a weight, you have to have the joint you want to paint with selected. And just before we do the painting, I always enable this under display tab, this mouse over to all Y. Simply because it gives me the information how much each point is assigned to which joint. And Cine4D has an auto weighting feature we will discuss later. And actually, if I zoom out a bit, you can see now, if I hover over this point, that the weight of that point is exactly split 50% to this hip and 50% to this knee joint. That means that they will both influence it the same amount when deformation occurs. Hope this is not difficult to follow. So let's now actually paint something. Here, this strength value, I strongly recommend you to use really small values, something between 1 and 5. And we will explain these modes a bit. In this add mode, well, it simply will add this amount to the point. So watch closely, I have the knee joint selected, and I will add 5% of this knee influence to this guy. So let's try. And you can already see the values change. Just look under my cursor. So now it's 55% for the knee and 45% for the hip. And this auto normalize ensures that if you take value somewhere or add value somewhere, it will always normalize it to 100%. So if I add 5 more percent to this joint, it will subtract 5% from this hip joint. So it will keep the combined value to 100%. While I was clicking, you actually saw me changing the weight for the joint. So I will actually paint how do I want my mesh to look when it reaches some sort of a position or some sort of a bending. I will show you if this mode add is on and you want to quickly subtract 5%, you will just hold down the Control key and you can clearly see that happen. The second mode that is really used often is this ABS or absolute mode, and what this means, it will actually set the point exactly to value you define here in string. So for example, let me set this to 100%. So I want this point to be 100% weighted to this knee joint. So if you click once, it will do just that. If you hover over it, you will actually see that is assigned to knee joint in full value, in 100%. Let me undo that. If you will be holding down the Control key while this absolute mode is on, you will completely clear the weights to 0 on that point. So like this, you can see that is not really what we want, so I will undo that. The next mode that is often used is this smooth, and it's pretty self-explanatory. It will give its best to smooth out those hard edges in this edge flow, in this edge loops. Another new feature in release 12 is this spray mode, and it will incrementally add exactly this value. And it's really useful if you have a graphics tablet like me. So if you drag, it will add values. So you don't have to click like a maniac on that point, and that is really useful. Under here, let me just talk about this visible only. It is really self-explanatory, but just in case, it simply means that you will paint only the weights that are visible to you, the points that are visible to you. This selected only means if you actually select some points directly on your polygon object, that you will be able to paint only on them. Here you have some options under brush. You can set the fall of type. You can set the radius, that is exactly the radius of this brush, so it can be much bigger if you want. Let's drop it back to 30, I believe. The hardness of the brush, and here you can actually clamp, or better term would be you can confine the values to some arbitrary numbers. It is also possible to paint with multiple joint selectors. For example, if you shift select, and you will be painting then on both of these guys, and it's mostly used for smoothing features. So you want to smooth out those values for both joints, so you'll find a middle ground for them. So increase the strength just a little bit. You see tiny changes happening. We're actually smoothing out the loops so you have cleaner edge flow. I really hope this is not too difficult to follow. It's really difficult to explain, but once you try it, you will really see how much logic there is behind it, and it really looks much more complicated than it actually is. Let me deselect all, and I will go to the next tab, and the next tab is the symmetry tab, and it's used when you have a character which is symmetrical and you simply want to avoid doing the weights on the other side once again, which can be really time consuming and tedious. And there are some settings here that are really self-explanatory. So once you will have a symmetrical character, you will paint just one side. I will show you something about mirroring and symmetry in the later lessons, so we'll just skip that for now. Let's go to this joints tab, and here you can actually see the list of your selected joints. You can actually select all joints and simply do a lock, and they will be always here regardless of you having them selected in the object manager or not. But be careful, you can simply paint weights wrongly this way because you will simply forgot that you have this enabled. Okay, so the next guy we have is this display tab, and here under display tab we have some additional functionality that can really help us while we are painting the weights. So for example, this draw all joints, it's really useful. Let me select some of these joints, and I will double click on this tab, and I actually lock it so I can have an access for it. And we will create in the next lesson a somewhat customized layout with the weight tool and the weight manager docked somewhere, just to have a setup that can really ease up on our workflow. So back to the track here, if I enable this draw all joints, watch what happens. It will draw the weighting of all joints regardless of if anything is selected or not. Here it will just emphasize the selected one a bit more so you can clearly see on which joint you are working on. This points guy will simply show the points, and it will color them correspondingly to how much they are weighted with each joint. Here, if you turn off this preview guy, he will turn off quite a few of these features, and you will have somewhat of empty screen around your brush. There will be no information, so this preview guy means will it draw the fall off? Will it draw it while you are painting? Will it draw an outline? So, for example, if I uncheck this outline, there will not be that radius that defines the size of the brush. So let's enable that. You can clearly see the difference. Here we have some additional settings, for example, how those minimum weights appear, or how those maximum weights appear, and so on and so forth. You can actually set the fade between those gradients, and if that is not enough for you, you can actually set the colors here to any you like. So this weight tool has quite a few options, so take your time to get familiar with them. Maybe I should just mention this mouse over. It means simply, if I check this selected, that means that when you hover over a point, you see just how much influence in percentage has the currently selected joint at that point. And if you select all, it will tell you the information about every joints that affect that specific point, or you can even set this to none, so you'll get no information. So this is really versatile. You have many options, so it's really hard to say what will suit you. It is really a matter of preference, what you find most pleasing and what seems to be most intuitive and most clear way for you to work. So we briefly discuss the weight tool, and now in the next lesson we will talk about something different, and it's not really so different. We will talk about weight manager, and I will show you how to block out your weights and to do some tweaking and painting.